with us here today. I want to start with a story for you. I don't think I've told the story, but I might have. About a year or two, I think, before I got married, some friends of mine said, hey, we want to go hike the Grand Canyon. Want to come? I'm like, yeah, let's go. And this beautiful trip, we got there, it was wonderful weather, it was, May, June, it was not too hot yet. But we had this plan. Now normally, the Grand Canyon, people hike all the way down to the river, and then they camp and they enjoy that, and they hike all the way back. But we were like, that's not tough enough. We're going to go down into the middle and hike for like 3 days, and come up the other side on another part. That'll be like a real trip, right? This was a stupid idea. Because the middle part of the top of the Grand Canyon is in that kind of that alpine range. It's nice and cool, it's quite pleasant. And the bottom where the river is they got the river, it's nice and cool. In the middle it's a desert. The middle level, which is like a plateau inside the Grand Canyon, is hot and dry and horrible. We decided we're going to hike through that for 3 days. That was dumb. So the first day we're going down, we're dying, it's all down these rocky steps, and you feel it in your legs. And then finally, one of our group was basically like, she couldn't do it. She had had enough. She would like, call the donkey, rescue me, get me out of here. They did the smart thing, and they went down to the river. She and her husband and one of the drivers went down to the river and actually enjoyed the rest of their trip. We were like, we're going to soldier on. We're going to do it. So we get down to that middle level, and we have no idea really. We have kind of an idea there's trails that we're following. So we just kind of go until finally we're like, can we just stop? And we basically stop right in the middle of the trail. No campsite, no nothing, no fire. And I laid down, I put my thing on the ground. I didn't even pitch a tent. I didn't even get in my sleeping bag. I just laid it on the ground and collapsed on top of it and passed out. At that point, if the entire canyon worth of scorpions decided to move in with me, I would have been happy. I wouldn't have cared. I was just done for the day. The next day, we're going, okay, we got to get to this point, to this point. We're in a desert. We're already running low on water. So we're going, what are we going to do here? We're starting to feel the effects of dehydration already after a long hike and now hiking in the heat. So we're just going, we hope, we pray we find something. So finally, about the middle point of the day, we find in this little, kind of go up into this little box canyon, we find in the rock, not a pool, a puddle of water. It's no bigger than the width of the aisle here, okay? No bigger than a baptismal font, if you will. And we're like, oh, water. And we look at it and we're like, oh, it's green and kind of gross. And there's a rattlesnake sitting on the edge of it, enjoying the cool water. And we sit there for probably 20 minutes and we're resting. We find, screw it, we're going to drink this water. We have to drink something. We have to get water, we're running out. So we kind of sneak up and we fill our bottles. And I got to tell you, this water was the nastiest water that ever existed on the earth. It was the swampiest, nastiest, rattlesnake tasting water you've ever had. And we boiled it, we put the tablets in it, we hit it with Kool-Aid, and it still tasted like the worst thing you've ever. And for years later, my little Nalgene bottle still smelled like that water. It never lost that. I don't use it, I threw it out. So we survived that, and we kind of like, we napped in the shade, probably 10 feet from the rattlesnake. We're like, he's tired, we're tired. We'll drink this nasty water and take a break. And then finally later we finally found like a real running water, which was that. But we survived the bitter water of the desert. And then on the third day we rose again. And we got out of that place like nobody's business. Okay. So the reason I tell you this story is because I was reminded last night in reading about the Sunday of the Cross. The reading reminded us that in the desert, when Moses was leading the people through the desert, they were also thirsty, and they came upon some water, the waters of Mara, which were the bitter waters. And what did he do about the bitter waters? He didn't have Nalgene bottles and purifier tablets. They didn't have anything. So he took the wood, I don't remember what it was it from the rod of Aaron or some wood he had, and threw the wood into the water. And the waters were turned to sweet water, and not bitter water. And the fathers of the church have always interpreted this incident as a prophetic symbol of the cross. Because the wood of the cross comes into our world, which was bitter and swampy and poisoned by the serpent through sin. And it transforms that pain and suffering and unpleasantness into the sweet waters of salvation. So the wood of the cross transforms the waters. I wish I had a relic of the true cross on that day. That would have helped a lot. So on the third Sunday of Lent, the church brings before us the precious cross. And it reminds us, this life, you're going to have bitterness, and you're going to have trials and temptations and soreness, regrets, confusions, dehydrations. You're going to have all of them in this life. Either you want it or not, you're going to have it, right? That's just life. But thanks be to God who said, that's not what I made this world to be like. That's not why I created my children to live like. I want them to have the sweet water of life and have it abundantly. So Christ comes into the world to give us the cross. Now that doesn't mean then that once we become Christians, life becomes without trial or without tribulation. But what happens is that we can find sweetness in the midst of our sufferings. We can find the sweetness and the refreshment even in the midst of our trials and tribulations. Through the cross. Through knowing that Christ himself, God himself, came down from heaven, lived like one of us, hungered and thirsted, and got tired like one of us, and even suffered and was shamed and humiliated and abused and murdered like one of us. And so we can endure our sufferings knowing that we have a high priest who has done the same with us. We have someone who has come with us through our time. So, again, if Lent is the school of catechism for our catechumens, those who are preparing for baptism, and we are coming along on the ride with them as they prepare for holy baptism, this is to remind them that yes, if you're preparing to grow close to Christ, to commend yourself and your whole life to Christ our God through baptism, through chrismation, or through the Eucharist, through any sacrament, through any step of action in which you descend into your heart and come closer to God, you will encounter difficulty. Expect it. I think I've said this now 2 weeks in a row already. Expect the difficulties of the Christian life, but don't despair. Don't be frustrated by them. Rejoice in them, because that's the sign that you are actually growing. You know, when you go to the gym, if you go to the gym, or if you just go for a walk and you feel sore the next day, that's because your muscles have been torn slightly in your muscle fibers. But you need to tear muscle fiber in order for muscle fiber to get bigger. That's the irony of growth. You have to kind of wreck a little bit to rebuild. And so the same thing is true with our spirit. We're going to have trial, we're going to have tribulation, we're going to have bitterness along the way. But through the cross, by focusing on the point that, hey, there's a destination we're heading towards. The destination of the resurrection through which Christ is leading us by his cross. We can endure it. We can get through it. We can even rejoice in it, saying, you know what? Thank God for this. Because this is going to make the resurrection so much the sweeter. This is going to make my life in Christ so much more meaningful. A life without suffering is actually kind of a sad life. It's okay, sweetie. I know. I'm telling you, suffering is okay. It's okay. Father Roman Braga, I've shared a few things from him of late. You know, one of the things he said, God, thank God for communist prison. It was good for us. He shocked people when he said that. They were like, how can you say that? He said, we needed it. We needed it. The suffering, the crucible of suffering that we went through, he and his generation that went through that crucible revealed such a blessing of grace in their lives, without which they would have never come to the depth of the knowledge of God that they had. We would not have the saints that we have in any generation of the church without the suffering that they endured. It's just part of the story. It's just part of the game. You want to get to one place to the other, you got to go down into the dark, down into the hot desert pit with its snakes and scorpions. And you've got to fight your way through it and get back on the other side. Through the cross, we have the power to overcome it and get through it. Not to evade it. We're not called to evade our suffering. We're called to persevere through our sufferings. So may God bless you through the power of the precious and the life-giving cross, and that you may rejoice in all of your troubles. Christ is among us.